And somebody stood up in front of a big, easel and took a marker and scribbled circles. And it was, this is civil rights. This represents civil rights. You go around and around, you do it again and again, and it moves in really weird directions, but this is civil rights.
Hello, and welcome to Out With It, the series by and for LGBTQ+ families. My name is Benjamin, and I'm Family Equality's Multimedia Storytelling Fellow. You've probably been hearing a lot about marriage equality lately. In July of 2025, Kim Davis filed a petition for the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit Obergefell v. Hodges, the landmark case that secured marriage equality in 2015. On Monday, November 10th, the Supreme Court announced it would not be revisiting marriage equality. So, what does this mean? Does this mean we can relax? And how does this impact LGBTQ+ people who want to form their families? To answer these questions, I'm joined by Family Equality's Vice President of Public Policy, Luce Remy. Luce, thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so happy to be here, Benjamin. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited for this episode. I think it's going to be incredible. We have this wonderful interview coming up in a few minutes. But before that, I was hoping you could give us a little context regarding Family Equality's involvement in the effort to achieve marriage equality.
Family equality has been in the fight around marriage equality pretty much since the beginning. I think even before marriage equality was really on the radar for LGBT plus individuals and couples, we were in the fight because our whole organization was built around the ability of LGBTQ plus people to form their families and maintain their families. I think originally we started in the 1970s because of people who were being separated from their biological children when they came out. And over the course of decades, we've maintained that work, being a support group, being an advocate for those individuals. We were part of a lot of the work that went to change how the court saw LGBTQ plus people and their ability to maintain access to their children. And then as the fight for marriage started in the late 90s and into the early 2000s, we as Family Equality, I believe we had many name changes, but I think we were Family Equality Council at that point, really were involved with the lawyers because as these cases were coming up, particularly Obergefell and some others, the argument had always been around a rights argument that it was, that these couples had been together, they deserved the same rights as their opposite sex couples to get married, to have, inheritance, to property, life insurance, all of that. And that conversation really went, and it persuaded some people. Like I remember when I first started hearing about marriage, the rights argument to me was the thing that made me interested. I was like, yeah, you're right. These couples have been together, they should have the same rights. But honestly, the polling that was going out around in that period of time found that the rights argument seemed to the majority of Americans seemed more opportunistic. It wasn't really resonating. And where family equality came in is when we started talking about love being love, about dignity, about respect for these relationships, and about the children that had been born, that were being born, and that would be born, and how they didn't deserve to have their parents and the relationship their parents had somehow be viewed as second class. They deserved the dignity and the respect for those relationships to be viewed as part of a family. I think one of the people we're going to interview, Mary, talks about, sorry, no, I think it was Polly, talks about in our discussion, she says, one of the things that was really impactful was that one of the kids she talked to said, it used to be when people saw me and my dad's walking down the street, they saw two gay men and a kid. Now they see a family. And that just like that to me is the starkest thing that family equality was involved in. And so we were really involved with GLAAD, with Lambda, with the other organizations in writing amicus briefs, telling the stories of these LGBTQ plus families, and particularly telling the stories of the children, how the fact that their parents were not recognized as a relationship, how they were not recognized, how their non-biological parents were not recognized as being parents affected them. So whether it was from how they were treated in school, whether it was from the ability of one parent to take them to the hospital, all of these really day-to-day stories were what we added to a conversation that was very legalistic. And I think it added heart to it. Family equality added the voices of these families and the heart and the real, and in practical terms that, that the justices could understand, that average citizens can understand. And I think that fundamentally changed the game. Even before we get to the court, the conversation that Family Equality was doing around storytelling and putting that information out there to people was changing hearts and minds, because people felt like they didn't know an LGBTQ plus family. They may know a gay person, they may know a lesbian, but they were like, but I don't know like an LGBTQ family. And it was like, no, like, and they thought that they were different, like somehow we were like, these magical gazelles in off on the Serengeti, instead of saying no, they are living right next door to you, those two guys and a little boy. That is a family, that is a gay family, and they have the exact same struggles as you two. The kid doesn't want to put on their socks for school, oversleeps, refuses to brush their teeth, is on the soccer team, they are balancing work and home, all of those things that are very practical. We told those stories. And then we also told the stories about how, as being as practical and normal as these families are, the different experiences they're having, and people could put themselves in the situation of our families. And I think it was noted by the justices in the majority opinion on Obergefell about the dignity argument and about how impactful it was for these children to have their parents' relationships recognized. And I think within the movement, it's been recognized. And so we've always stood in that space, providing both support to LGBTQ plus individuals as they have their families, as they form them, as they protect them. But we've also been there telling their stories in policy, in legislation, in court, so that we can keep moving us forward.
And earlier this week, the Supreme Court decided that they were not going to revisit Obergefell, that marriage equality is the law of the land. So I think we should address this really existential question, which is that is marriage equality safe? Can we relax right now, or is there a universe in which this issue comes back up again? What do you think?
So, as I said, I'm not Pollyannish. I tend to be a worst case scenario planner. And so for me, my response is that I think marriage is not written in stone, could never be challenged. But today we are more secure than we were the day before. However, to maintain that security, it still requires our community to have conversations with our with the straight community, with the American public, to really explain to them why we should keep marriage. As you'll see, as we talked about during my interview with Mary and Polly, one of the things Mary noted was the statement of like, SCOTUS may not want to hear it now. And I think that that is something that's really true. That the fact that they were very clear and very quickly said no, denied David Kim Davis's cert petition, to me tells me more that they don't want to hear it now. We've seen Justice Amy Coney Barrett come out in interviews and in her most recent book saying that Obergefell and the right to marry is a bedrock principle of law, and that's great. I think that means that she's not. I for what that's worth, I think it means that from her perspective, she's not inclined towards reversing it. But I still think we as a community need to pay attention to the arguments that were made in Dobbs and really um, sort of weatherproof marriage. So I think we need to be having both the lawyers who, like Mary and Polly, and the policy experts like us at Family Equality and at other organizations, need to be out there talking to legal minds to make sure that we have arguments for, because there are people out there who would fundamentally like to see marriage equality overturned. We have to be out there preparing the thoughtful legal arguments. I think Family Equality as an organization needs to be out here, and we are. And I love the storytelling initiatives that we are doing to really reinforce what we did that led up to marriage equality, which is reinforce the stories. Start talking about how these families are today, how families have been impacted by the ability to have marriage equality versus their lives before. Start talking about things that are still happening in America to families, even with marriage equality, how we're still seeing situations where people are not being able to be recognized as parents. And sort of having that conversation so that people understand that it isn't that marriage equality was some sort of niche thing for a small, like that it has a fundamental impact and that it is something that is affects everyone and affects our families in a way. So keep telling those stories so that if and when a case comes forward that the court is inclined to hear about questioning the basis of marriage equality, we have both our legal arguments and we have our storytelling. And I think one of the best ways to get there really is that storytelling piece to make sure that like a plurality of the American people think that marriage equality is just like the First Amendment, you know? Of course you have freedom of speech. Of course you have marriage equality. I don't think marriage is at risk today, but I think if we want to be secure, there are things we can do, start doing today so that whatever comes in the future, our families are still safe.
Okay. I feel like we've teased the interview enough. Can you tell me a little bit about who you spoke to and what you covered in your conversation?
Yeah, so we spoke with Mary Bonauto and patients Polly Crozier, both from GLAD Law. They are amazing advocates. Mary was one of the three lawyers who argued Obergefell v. Hodges before the Supreme Court. She has a 30 plus year, almost 40-year history of working on LGBTQ family law and legal issues, has been in GLAD for almost that long. And both of them have focused on family law and LGBTQ plus families. Polly is someone that I still work with currently now on LGBTQ plus policy, particularly around parentage. And as we're talking about sort of like what does it look like today, one of the things that's still happening for us is that we still are seeing family codes that are really reflective of the pre-Obergefell period, where it's only mother and father, where they don't recognize the parentage of children born through assisted reproduction. We have more and more children that are being born that way, and they're not just all from LGBTQ plus families. So recognizing intended parents. We are seeing much more blended families. How do we make sure that blended families have the parentage recognitions for that step parent to be able to have rights in case something happens? And so I work with Polly on a lot of those parentage rights issues at the state level, and also talking about policies related to child assisted reproduction, both federally and state. So it's a great conversation. Mary is talking about this, her 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 history in the movement, her work on marriage equality. Polly is talking about what's happening today, how she sees the states. And we just have a great conversation. I think we talk in a way that I hope will both reassure people, but also give them really practical information about things that they can do around protecting their families and just also highlighting the importance of their visibility as well as, you know, their engagement in their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, shall we go ahead and jump into the interview?
Let's do it.
All right, Mary Bonauto, she, her, attorney at Ladla.
Hi, and I'm Polly Crozier, she, her, and also an attorney at Glad Law. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. So, Mary, you were one of the three lawyers who argued before the Supreme Court in Obergefell v. Hodges. But your work on marriage equality didn't start in 2015. What motivated you to start advocating for LGBTQ plus individuals and families?
Like, where do you begin? You know, like growing up in a world where we were invisible and stomped on and not mentionable, criminalized, like all that contributed. But I will just say, especially becoming a lawyer, you just become aware of who's in and who's out. And, you know, marriage comes with so many default protections under law at all life stages and all kinds of things people can't anticipate, but then it's there when you need it. And as a lawyer, I became aware of that almost instantly when I started practicing in 1987. So, you know, from the beginning of being a lawyer, actually, even when I was in law school, I just became aware of how consequential it was to marry. So, you know, people who thought they were going to spend their lives together and poured everything into like, you know, their resources into trying to remodel a house so they would have a family home. And then one of them says, you're out of here. And they're not married. And the person with the better lawyer who could afford the lawyer wins, you know, that kind of thing. And we've had so many issues. And I feel like I have all these things rattling around in my bones, so many issues where somebody got sick didn't expect to die and they did, or you come home and your partner or whatever is on the floor, like et cetera, and no rights. You know, I it's I mean, so many of these things really get to me, but like I had a really good friend who found her partner on the floor in the bathroom, and the law was you have to call her relatives in Alabama, you know, and here this woman, they had been together over 25 years, couldn't call to say, please take the body and let's move on from here. There's so many things, and it's like, I also remember these guys. One they had a good little life together. One was a Boston Fire Department captain. One had like a small little antique shop, and really took care of the home and all that. And his spouse, obviously, partner, I'm sorry, was obviously like on the go all the time. And then the partner got sick. He got terrible throat cancer. This other individual just cared for him night and day. He was going to choke on these mucus plugs he had from his illness. And, in the end, of course, the captain died. His partner was left with zero, everything. So he lost the love of his life and he lost his economic security. And I feel like I could tell that story through so many people again and again. And I will also just say, like, I know we all think about children a fair amount too. And, when we litigated the Goodridge case in Massachusetts, we had 7 couples and some of them had children. And I remember one in particular, their daughter was in high school. And, again, this was considered a really exotic case, being treated equally with respect to the government licensing business. Um, she was so resentful that her parents were being criticized and judged when they had been together for 20 years at that point, and none of her friends' parents had been together that long. And she felt like they were great parents, and she heard a lot about other parents. And I'm not trying to diss parents, okay, but just that sense of like, I think kids get it that their families are outsiders. They're pushed outside the circle of belonging. They're weird and they're exotic. And by contrast, I have heard, at least from some young people, after Goodridge, for example, that, this one kid said to me, well, before when we walked down the street, him and his 2 dads, it was 2 guys and a kid. And now they see a family.
And you talk about like how kids get it. They get this notion of, and that really sort of granular thing of it's not 2 guys and a kid, it's a family walking down the street. And like that's what brought me to the work from, and it just I can't fundamentally. And I guess I'm thinking like, okay, so we got marriage, like we got Obergefell in 2015. So everything solved? Like everything's great, or is there still work to be done? I'm Polly, I'll start with you, and Mary, please chime in.
Well, I think, it's one of the characteristics of our work, right? That like nothing's really ever done, right? There's always progress to be made. There's always education to be done. There's always people that are left behind because they don't have access to counsel or whatnot. So in any event, I always think every issue, it's never over. But I think obviously marriage equality has been a tremendous boon for families, for children, for society. But yeah, of course, there always remains work to be done. I think, of course, many people in our community and choose to get married and some don't, right? And so for those families who choose not to get married, we want to make sure that they have, particularly, I come from a family law perspective, and we want to make sure that their children have the security of a legal parent-child relationship, even if their parents don't get married for whatever reason. So I think that's important work that people are doing across the country to make sure that kind of no matter how a child comes into our lives, we want that child to be protected, to have all the benefits, the access to decision making, the access to medical insurance, like those economic benefits and the ability to stay with the parent and experience that love. Regardless of marital status. So I think what marriage brings for children in the parentage setting is that incredible automaticity, right? That a child born into a marriage is the child of those parents, and there's just a sense of security of being a part of um, this safety net. But of course, there's other kids, and we want to make sure that every child is protected.
Yeah. Can you talk about that, both of you? Because I mean, I think, we all get the sort of very hetero sort of presumption, like two people get married, of course all the kids are theirs. And then is that not what we're seeing even today, polyamory and the work that we're seeing? Is that are we're not having all of our families recognized in that way, that presumption of like if they got married, that they are being presumed to be a family unit and going that way. And then how do we, at the state level and also federally, how do we get the recognition for those families who are choosing quite within their rights to not get married? How do we make sure that those relationships are recognized legally?
Well, I think one thing we always counsel folks is that while marriage is such an incredible protection and such a joyful institution, that for LGBTQ families, where many people, one or more parents might not be genetically connected to their child, that there's always, you want to go for that belt and suspenders. You want to take some action to make sure that you're protected. And that actually, that recommendation is usually please access an adoption decree, a parentage judgment, a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage, something that is a judicial decree or the equivalent of a judicial decree. So no matter where you go in the country, right, no matter kind of what hospital you walk into or whatnot, that it's really clear that your parent-child relationship has to be respected. So I don't know if that was getting at your question. Maybe Mary wants to add to it, but I think that, unfortunately for LGBTQ people, the reality is we kind of got to do more. We got to do more, and it's worth taking that extra step to protect our kids.
One of the things I was going to say is I also remember when I was in law school, the Bowers versus Hardwick case coming down, the one that upheld the sodomy law in Georgia. And there was a line in it. The way the case was argued was kind of as a family law case. These are people, they're together, they have a home, etc. And the court said the idea of citing those family law precedents was, quote, at best facetious.
Hmm.
And it was a colossal statement of disrespect from the Supreme Court. And it fed the criminal law and it fed the otherness of queer people. And I think we live with that today. There's plenty of people who just don't feel and believe that, you know, our families are our families, that they're a family like other families. We're different and they want to keep it that way. So I think Polly's point about having to take those extra steps is just social reality, not everywhere. But like in truth, like you might live in Brooklyn and have an awesome life and a great community, but if you've got to travel to some other states, you could really run into a problem. Or, if you don't have your legal protections and your ducks in a row and there's an illness or a death, you could have a big problem. So I'm all about, I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer too, but like, please take the steps. And we have, and you have, we all, I think together have very good documents about this kind of thing.
Yeah, I always tell people, um, for LGBTQ plus individuals and families, like it is not, we are intentional about the creation of our families. These are very conscious choices that we are all making, and that we should be equally intentional in protecting those and honoring those choices, which means having some sort of judicial document that's really stating the relationship you intended to have with your child, you intend to have with your partner, you intend to do with your resources. Just kind of putting this blanket of protection around it because everything was so intentionally done. We shouldn't just leave it to the whims of any community, even if we trust our community to recognize those on the back end.
Can I just jump in to say, I mean, I think that's a great point. And I also think that as a community, we need to remember that we need to treat ourselves with respect and love and our children, right? That I think sometimes in the past, because of inequalities in the law, depending on what state you live
Hmm.
in or whatnot, some people that might have more legal power in a relationship, right? Like the birth mother, for example, might take advantage of that and try to separate a child from the non-genetic parent. And I think to me, it's a reminder that all of us can do better, right? All of us, can try to reduce conflict because what we know about family law cases is like conflict is what is bad for kids, right? Like period, end of sentence. And that the more we can center our kids and make sure that they have what they need and put like kind of our adult needs in the in the back seat, so important, right? We're not just struggling against an administration or folks who might want to discriminate against us. We're also we're also a little struggling with our human nature, and making sure that we're doing the best by our kids. And even if you don't have the legal protections, you didn't have the money to hire the lawyer, you didn't weren't able to go to court, you can still do the right thing and make sure your kid stays together with both parents.
Right. Because there's, they have that love and that relationship with the non-genetic parent, with the adoptive parent, with the foster parent, and so that should be maintained because the more love the kid has, the better they do. And actually, to something you just mentioned, Polly, it all seems to still, even today, depend on what state you're in. I know we've um, heard stories recently about parents who've been married for years. The non-genetic parent is taking the child to the hospital and still having trouble registering that child because she is not the genetic mother. And I guess, what is the landscape, particularly legislatively right now, for marriage equality, for parental recognitions? What protections are, like, what is that looking like? And then you could also talk about what's happening federally as well.
That's a great question, Luce. I'm trying to think about how to best answer it. I mean, I think the good news is like parentage and those legal parent-child relationships are a creature of state law, right? Which means there's a lot of difference in how states treat parent-child relationships, but uh, also a lot of flexibility, right? And I think that a lot of states have done the really building blocks work of updating their laws to make sure that no matter how a child comes into our family, there's a way to protect them to their parents. Some states have not done that work, but I think
Keeps
that
both you and I busy,
with
Becky.
that.
I said that keeps both you and I busy.
I know, totally. But I think the good news is, like, in my experience and in my work, which is really collaborative and really like across movements, is that it's really popular work, right? Like, people really understand the need to secure a child to their parent, right? Because of the incredible, you know, rights and responsibilities that come with that relationship. And also, like, family is just something that really lots of people understand. So to me, it's really like hope in this kind of difficult times. It's really hopeful work. It's really hope work that brings people together. So in any event, so I think, yeah, there's something of a patchwork, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay. Because I know that I've heard from people, they just feel like it's very, like, what happens in Kansas is not what happens in Michigan, is not what happens in Washington, D.C. So it's good to hear that you're hopeful that the work
Oh,
is being done. I mean,
totally. Progress is being made, and I think, and also progress is about educating people to make sure that they can put whatever in place in their particular state. And honestly, that's one of the wonderful benefits of marriage is that in every state, if you are married, you can access the step parent adoption process, right? And so, yeah, I think there's also a lot of work to be done to just educate folks about what they can do in their particular state to protect their family.
Yeah, that was such a game changer because there were so many states that foreclosed unmarried couples from adopting together. So yeah, huge.
and we're still trying to get sort of the ability for non-married couples who have existing relationships as well. I mean, that's a harder hurdle, but
Yeah.
still, it's also equally important, the work that probably you've been doing, Family Equality has been doing, to push that as well.
Yeah. So with respect to the state legislative landscape on marriage right now, I mean, we have Obergefell. It is the law of the land. So in all 50 states, you have the right to marry on the same terms and conditions as others, to have your marriage treated like all others, and to nationwide recognition. So that's the law currently, regardless of what state law is. However, I will say that if you go back and remember the 90s and 2000s and so on, so many states passed amendments to their state constitutions to try to foreclose any possible benefit or recognition of a marriage, any little thing. I think in Nebraska, it was a question of like a designation of remains. No, can't do that. So we have some tough stuff out there. Nevada, California, Colorado, Hawaii have all re-amended their constitutions to be good. But what that leaves us with is 27 states with amendments. So should Obergefell be overturned, those amendments come back. And at the same time, we live in this sort of duality. So now talking about federal legislation. So the Respect for Marriage Act, enacted, actually moved on quickly by the Congress in a bipartisan fashion, and then, signed by the president in December 2022. Um, that says, they were anticipating the worst. This is all after Dobbs when Justice Thomas was saying that Obergefell and Windsor and Lawrence should be revisited and all that. So they did move on it. So what they say is going forward, the federal government is going to continue to respect marriages as long as they're valid or certified. So that's important. And that was essentially the result of the Windsor case too on the Federal Defense of Marriage Act. So federal benefits, but that's a law. Laws can change, but that is the law. And, it, again, the fact that it follows the Supreme Court decision is a helpful thing. And then the other piece it says is no discrimination against marriages based on sex, race, ethnicity, national origin. Just because Obergefell was singled out doesn't mean there aren't a lot of other people with a lot of other attitudes. So you can't discriminate against those marriages in any way, no matter what your underlying state law is. So that amendment comes roaring back, which again I know was on their minds, and it has some noxious language. It all comes back, I guess, right? But at the same time, what the Respect for Marriage Act is saying, state officials, state governments have to respect the marriage. So again, to be clear, if we were in an overturned situation, it would feel like a marriage as of that point. It was not like a marriage today. No doubt about it. So, but in any event, I just want to put that out there. And I think it's important for people to remember that this whole idea of the Congress using its powers under the full faith and credit clause to say, as they're saying now, we're going to mandate a rule of respect for marriages. Back in 96, when they passed the Federal Defense of Marriage Act to say disrespect, they all thought this was the greatest idea ever. Okay. So now they're all going to dump on it. But I'm just going to say there's a lot of scholarship out there from the other side about why this is perfectly permissible. So,
Yeah.
we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But that's part of the landscape right now.
Yeah, and actually it's funny, like not funny, but it's what concerns me oftentimes is those state constitutions where we saw
Sure.
the 27 states with those amendments. And I guess I'm wondering, I know that we within Family Equality take it very seriously working to try to see those overturned. I think one of the things we've learned from Dobbs is that we can't assume that everything is safe, and that talking about how we can build the process, how we can work with our communities to try to remove those laws that are on the books. And I guess it leads me into the question, like, what do we need to do to protect marriage today, marriage equality today?
Yeah, there's a few answers to that. I mean, to me, one of them honestly is this. So I remember going to a conference that was sponsored by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and somebody stood up in front of a big, easel and took a marker and scribbled circles. And it was, this is civil rights. This represents civil rights. You go around and around, you do it again and again, and it moves in really weird directions, but this is civil rights. And I started laughing out loud because that's how I had felt. Like you think you win something and then you're back at it, and then there's a new argument. And so my point being, we have to just remain engaged in persuasion. We have to remain engaged in familiarizing people with our families and our motives and our values. And it's so helpful when we can interact with people who might say, weird things or seemingly hostile things or ignorant things, and to have some grace about it. Because boy, we are in a persuasion campaign. We were then, we were for decades, and we remain in one. And, I also am aware of this. Somebody had done a study that's not published about what do other civil rights movements wish they had done. And they all wish they had continued educating the public about their issues.
Mm.
And so I take that to heart. And so I think, it's so low tech conversations, right? But so important. So I definitely view that as one thing. And then, when it comes to a ballot campaign, I'll just say to try to change a state constitution, um, I, I think it's going to depend on the state. And, do you need a supermajority? Do you have actually a volunteer base? Do you have a functional statewide organization? Like all these kinds of things to figure out. You don't just, it's really got to be put together as a serious campaign that gets serious funding in order to succeed, because there's so much at stake. But yeah, that kind of thing is doable, and 4 states have shown the way, starting with Nevada in 2020.
Mhm. It seems like, as you said, it's a scribble of civil rights, but that there are those people out there trying to reverse the progress we've made. So with after 35 years, Mary, and 20 plus years for you, Polly, what inspires you? What keeps you in this work fighting for LGBTQ plus families?
Well, for me, it's I got too many stories I got to resolve and to like make sure it doesn't happen again. And I get inspired by Luce, like you're here, Polly's here. Like I get so inspired by what other people are doing and people finding their ways to contribute to like justice and our collective security, and in our whole fullness, however communities we're part of. So that really keeps me going. I was supposed to stay in this job for 2 years, so
How many decades later?
yeah, exactly. I was a mere child, but anyway, yeah, so that's super important. Polly, what keeps you in?
Oh, same thing. I just think personally, I think from my time as a family lawyer and my time at Glad Law, like I really understand and have been connected to people who have truly suffered tremendously. Um, and it reminds me that every family and every child is important and that you just have to keep talking and working and there is progress forward. Yeah.
One of the things I have to emphasize to people all the time, Obergefell may not have been decided the way it was decided in 2015 if it were coming before the court today. We have seen the court, reverse important precedents. So maybe it wouldn't be decided the same way, maybe. But the question is, now that it's here, now that people are married, now that it's become so much part of the culture, now that businesses and employers and certainly couples and kids and families are relying on it, are you going to reverse it?
That is one of the things that keeps coming up for me was like, okay, so let's engage in the fever dream if they reverse it. Well, what about now? You're creating this sort of, there are those who got it and there are those who didn't, and the different rights then protections for families, for children, particularly. Suddenly you're putting people outside. And what's the difference? Just a difference in time.
I know we all have a lot of things to talk about and advocate about, and we have a lot of shelter from the storm to provide for a lot of people. So I know we all have very full plates, and plus we have to take care of ourselves. But I will just say, if people can fit in a little bit of like, here's how I think about marriage. Here's why it's like, we don't have any. We have 3 restrictions on marriage. You can't already be married. Can't marry a super close relative. You have to be a proper age. And prior to Obergefell and prior to Goodridge, the only people who could marry who met all those other qualifications were us. And so we can't go back there. The culture has changed.
Thank you guys so much. You guys have done so much over the decades. The relationship between family equality and Glad Law has been so in lockstep. And I really just appreciate you guys taking the time to go down a little bit down memory lane and to go a little bit forward. We'll probably be reaching out again. We continue to work together.
It's been a great conversation, and I know that we all had to sign off, but thank you so much for having it. I mean, I think Glad Law is really happy to be part of the conversation, and yeah, thanks a lot.
We now know marriage equality is safe, but there's still so much work left to do. There are still regressive state amendments in place that would take effect if marriage equality were overturned, and we still have to ensure there are options for parental recognition in every US state, whether you're married or not. That's the policy side of this work. As Luce mentioned, the other half is storytelling. So how can you get involved? Speak out. Share your story. Now is the time for us to show the world that marriage equality rests on a strong, widely supported foundation. It's what we did in 2015, and it's what we'll continue to do to protect and advance LGBTQ+ rights. Share your story at familyequality.org/marriage-story. Lastly, we should never forget to celebrate how far we've come. To end this episode, you'll hear from Family Equality Board member and the named plaintiff in the case that won marriage equality, Jim Obergefell, who spoke at Family Equality's Night at the Pier Gala in May.
I do. Such a simple sentence that captures enormous weight. 2 words that can transform a relationship. 2 words that create a family. My late husband John and I said those words nearly 12 years ago. He was dying of ALS, and he wanted to die a married man. I wanted to be recognized as his surviving spouse. I wanted the right to call myself his husband and later his widower in every sense of those words. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But at the time, Ohio law recognized only marriages between one man and one woman. Faced with John's illness, saying I do required us to jump through hoops that most couples never face. But we made it happen. I took his hand inside a chartered medical jet on the tarmac of Baltimore Washington International Airport, and after more than 20 years together, we said, I do. Saying those two words changed everything. How we felt about each other, our relationship, and our family. 2 years later, I stood before the Supreme Court of the United States because John and I wanted what every single couple deserves: dignity, respect, and recognition. That's all the more than 30 plaintiffs in Obergefell v. Hodges wanted: to be seen as families in the eyes of the law. On June 26, 2015, we got our wish, and so did queer people across the country. But our fight was never just about us. It was about all families, built by love, shaped by resilience, made visible by the courage to say, we belong. This year marks 10 years since that landmark decision. 10 years since the law caught up with the truth we've always known. Love is love, and family is family. But as we celebrate, we also recommit, because our fight didn't end in 2015. It lives on. In classrooms where kids with two moms feel invisible. In courtrooms where queer parents must fight for their rights. And in every piece of legislation that tries to roll back our progress. Our rights are under attack. From the Supreme Court to state legislatures, opponents of equality are targeting our community. And our trans family members are bearing the brunt. As Justice Kennedy wrote in the Obergefell decision, no union is more profound than marriage, for it embodies the highest ideals of love, fidelity, devotion, sacrifice, and family. No matter how we define or form our families, they allow us to become something greater than we once were. And that is worth fighting for. So thank you. Thank you for standing with us, for fighting for what's right, and for ensuring that the next generation doesn't just inherit progress, they build on it. Thank you for saying I do to family equality.
This has been a Family Equality production. As the leading national organization for LGBTQ+ families, we work to advance equality through advocacy, support, storytelling, and education to ensure everyone has the freedom to find, form, and sustain their families. Today's episode was produced by the communications team, and our music was designed by the incredible Michael Koppelman. Be sure to follow @Family Equality on socials for up-to-date resources, community events, and ways to get involved.